Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our homeschooling and special education supporting your child workshop today with Erin Maguire, who is the Director of Equity and Inclusion and the Co-Director of Student Support Services at the Essex Westford School District. All of our workshops, including our previous workshops, are recorded and can be watched on our VFN YouTube channel. The link is on our website, which is vermontfamilynetwork.org. Everyone who is registered for today's workshop will receive a follow-up email with a link to this recording, as well as a PDF of the presentation with live links. So Vermont Family Network has been serving families of children with special health needs and disabilities and the professionals who serve them for more than 30 years. We are the federally designated Parent Training and Information Center, the Family to Family Health Information Center, and the Vermont chapter of both Family Voices and Parent to Parent USA. So today's workshop is being recorded, so please keep that in mind as you share information about your situation in the chat. These sessions will include live captions. If you want to turn them off, click on Live Transcript, then Hide Subtitle. If you're comfortable, you are welcome to turn on your camera. You can ask questions using the chat box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to share information or links to resources that you found helpful in the chat as well. We all know that we can learn a lot from each other. So I'm excited to introduce you to Erin Maguire. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Karen, and to everyone at the Vermont Family Network. I want to take a moment before I begin to just appreciate all of the collaboration between VFN and the school districts in partnership with parents. Your work is critical, and we are grateful to have you as a partner as we do this really important work. So thank you for all of your service and all of your dedication. I'd also like to take a moment to thank all the parents who are here with us today and also watching maybe later, just to say a deep thank you from me to you for all that you do for your children to make sure that they have what they need. They are reaching their potentials and becoming happy people in this world and having a sense of belonging and inclusion in our schools. So thank you for all you do to ensure that. I am going to move into sharing my screen, but before I do that, I would like to just share a little bit about myself. I am, as Karen said, the Director of Equity and Inclusion and Co-Director of Student Support Services for EWSD. I've been in the Essex School District system for about 18 years doing special education leadership work, and over the last 2 years doing equity and inclusion work for the district. I also have served in leadership roles both at the state level and currently serve as the president of the national organization for special ed directors called the Council of Administrators of Special Education. And so again, also appreciate the opportunities I have at the national level to interact with the U.S. Department and regularly support funding for PTIs nationally. I think it's so important. So just a little bit about some things that I do above and beyond this particular topic. I am excited to talk with you about the importance of the collaboration between school districts and homeschool families in Vermont. I think that it is something that we don't talk about enough, and so I was really honored to be offered the opportunity to speak to you about this topic because it is near and dear to my heart. I think it's really important that no matter what educational opportunities are chosen by families for their children, that we want to be in service to supporting that. So I will now move into sharing my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and move into present mode. I may come out of that a little bit during the presentation as well, in order to share some resources and walk you through some websites that I'll share with you today. So I am going to go ahead and initiate our conversation first by sharing with you a little bit about what we're going to discuss today. So my plan is to talk with you first a little bit about special education in general, share some concepts that are really important as we think about the relationship between homeschool and school districts related to special ed. I'll talk about parental rights, and while there's not a lot of parental rights specifically in Vermont in the parental rights document about homeschool, I would like to talk with you about your rights as families, and what you have access to and how to think about that. We'll talk about special education evaluations and services plans for homeschool families, as well as some engagement strategies for you when you are looking to engage with a school district and you're not sure where to start if you've chosen to homeschool, or even if you think thinking about it. And then I will wrap up by sharing some tools for intervention, because I know many families, as you do work as homeschool families, you are the teacher, and that means that you need resources. And if you have a student, a child with a disability, there may be some resources out there that you don't know about that we use as school districts all the time that are completely open and available to you. So I will go ahead and share some of those as well. I also see just a few chats. Yes, okay, great. Thanks, Rachel, for putting that in there. There is a link to the slide deck itself. It's a Google presentation, and I've opened it up to be available to anyone with the link. So you'll be able to go right in there if you'd like to, and you can go ahead and do that now if you want. And we will also, as Karen said, follow up with a PDF of the presentation. So I hope those are some topics that are what you were expecting today, given the conversation. So let's go ahead and get into it. So first, we're just going to talk a little bit about the basics of special education. This is likely a repeat for some of you, but it feels important just to get us all on the same page. Special education is driven by IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, and it comes from the work of many civil rights activists related to the rights of people with disabilities, really trying to make sure that there's access for children with disabilities in public schools that is codified in law. And that drive that happened back in the late 60s and early 70s was very successful in that the law that was passed has been maintained, sustained, and enhanced over the last 35 years to really come to a point where it is today. And IDEA, the federal law, does govern the process by which public schools create access to education for students who are eligible for special education due to a disability. And what it entitles students to is a free, appropriate public education. That means that students have a right to make reasonable progress on their goals, both general education and special education, that is reasonable within the light of the child's individual circumstances. And that's a new legal standard that's been set by the United States Supreme Court to think about what is the entitlement that is provided by special education. Inside of IDEA, there are some specific expectations when families choose to place their children in an independent school themselves or to homeschool. And when that happens, when a parent is choosing to homeschool or choosing to place their child in Vermont, what's called an independent school, and pay for that placement themselves outside of the public school process, there does become a limitation to the entitlement to special education. I share this to make sure that everyone understands that that takes place, because the legal rights associated with special education are primarily around students who are in public school settings. And the amount of sort of entitlement and rights change pretty substantially when students move into homeschool. But before we go into that, because it is important that you know that, but also all the resources and opportunities for relationship and collaboration, and also for some potential services. And we'll talk about how you access services for your child if you are homeschooling. I did just want to share that reality with you. And I did also feel like it was important to share that when students are eligible for special education inside of a public school setting, the IEP is a written statement that is designed to meet the individual's child's needs from that free, appropriate public education standard, and that everyone who receives special education services must have an IEP. There's lots of process around that. Some of you may have already been through that process, and that is not true, that there is not an IEP for students who are parentally placed in independent schools or are homeschooled. And so that is something that's important to know. I am going to talk a little bit later about the ability to access the public school programming in general education, even if you are homeschooling. And that has a unique intersection in that anytime children are in public schools, the rights related to special education apply, even if it's only for part of the day. So we'll talk a little bit about that complexity later, but generally if a parent is homeschooling or engaging homeschool in some way through another parent, and that's 100% of the program, then children in homeschool don't have IEPs. However, I did want you to know that there is a relationship between homeschool and IDEA. And interestingly, it is different state by state. So as I do my work nationally, what I know and understand is that when I talk about my responsibility as an LEA in Vermont to homeschool families, people become confused because some states do not provide any rights or any expectation to homeschool at all. And some states include homeschool families in this under the federal law, which is termed the unilateral parental placement component. And so we do in Vermont, and I'm grateful for this, have a responsibility to homeschool families. We'll talk about that. And we do that through something called services plans and also through consultation. I did want to share with you that, and we'll talk a little bit about the proportionate share of funds that schools need to set aside for independently placed students and homeschool students, that is actually, I think, about to increase in size. So I'm just going to take a moment to talk a little bit about funding, because that's an important part of this conversation. Every school district in Vermont that is a public school receives federal funds for special education. And in Vermont, all school districts through the federal funding process are required to have a set aside set of dollars that they use to provide services to children who are parentally placed in independent schools, and in Vermont, also at home, so homeschool students. What that means is that there is a pot of funds that the district needs to think about and engage around and provide services with to students with disabilities. And that can include for students who are homeschooled. I want you to know that there has been an incredible increase in the number of families who have homeschooled since COVID. I don't remember the exact percentage of increase in Vermont from the COVID impact, but it has been substantial. And the way the proportionate share is created, so how much money do I need to set aside to spend around homeschool or independent school placements, is based on the total population of students in those placements. And so because of that, I expect to see a fair amount of proportionate share money, which is what we call this money, increase, because there has been this huge number of increase in homeschool students. So the money available for services over the next year is likely to increase. And so no matter what school district you're in, knowing and understanding how much proportionate share there will be and what the process of proportioning that share to people for services is something that you can know and understand. It's part of our requirement. So I did just want to link the federal money to the local decisions about how we spend money, specifically around homeschool students. I see some chats, Karen.
Yes, I can read this out loud too.
Sure, go ahead.
Erin. So how does the district decide how to portion out the set aside funds for homeschool / independent school students? Is it evenly divided, first come, first serve, something else?
So, I do have this in a slide later, but I will share this now and then mention it again in the later slide as well, is that the school district needs to be able to describe its process for allocating funds, but there's no required process. We need to be able to articulate how we made that decision, but it is up to the school district about how they will apportion the funds. They can actually, if they want to, for example, if they have a particular independent school that has a large number of students in it that need services or could benefit from services, they can allocate all the funds to that one school and spend the money there. There's nothing in the rules that stop that from happening. That's not what we do in EWSD, and that's sort of why I said it's important for you can ask through the consultation process, how is it that you apportion the proportionate share funds? Do you just choose one school because of some reason? Are you allocating it evenly across individual students? I can tell you what we've done to date, which is that we have taken a look at the students who are both in an independent school placement through parents, which is actually much less in Essex Westford, the conversation, and how many students are in a homeschool situation, and then think about all of those students, what those students need, and try to apportion the money to meet the needs of those students as best we can. So it's really sort of an individual student analysis, and then a look at how much funds do we have, and then apportioning those funds to try to meet as many needs as we possibly can. And we also do an analysis of the severity of need in that conversation as well. But you don't have to do it that way. Instead, you could do it as I described earlier. So I hope that helps answer that question with an example. Is there another?
So Erin, yeah, there is a follow-up. How would a parent then know? Should they ask their director of special education? Where would this information be available?
Yes, so let's move ahead in the presentation because I am going to talk about how to engage your school district as one of, if you remember here, I'll just go back to the agenda for a moment. We're going to talk about engagement strategies for working with school districts for sure. So let me just hold on to that question and move ahead and move through that. And we're also going to talk all about special education evaluations and service plans for students who are in homeschool. So if you have a concern that your child needs services, but they haven't been evaluated yet, we'll talk about that too. All right. So I wanted to, this link goes directly to the parental rights for special education. And I wanted to let you know that, again, I think I said this earlier, there's not a lot in there about homeschooling. So I thought it would be a good idea to share with you some of the things that I sort of see as your rights as you think about being a homeschool family for a child who is also eligible for special education. And I'd like to start on the general education side of things because you do have access to up to 40% of the school day in the public school should you choose to access it. And that is sort of, you can create the areas that you want to use the public school for if you are homeschooling. So for example, if you're a parent who feels very confident in math and science instruction, but less confident in English language arts, you could have your child participate in reading or writing at the public school. And as long as you don't go above your 40% mark of the day, then you can access that. I think it's important for you to know that you also have access to the standards. School districts will identify what's called essential standards that we teach to, and having access to those standards can be really helpful in developing a homeschool program. You have access to anything that's public information from the school, as well as access to community offerings, and then also possible access to direct consultation if that's something that the school district is offering. And then general consultation is a requirement for all of the independent schools and homeschool families inside of a district's boundary. With relationship to special education, you have access to evaluation. You have access to special education related to public school attendance. So I talked a little bit about that before. I'm going to finish this list and go back to these to describe them a little bit more. You have possible access to funds for services and access to consultation around special education specifically. So as we think about access to evaluation, you have access to make a referral to evaluation, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that process. If you end up using the public school for part of your home study program, you may have access to an IEP for your child for that particular component of the program. So I'll give you an example. As an LEA, if I have a family move into a home study program, or they are in a home study program, but they're accessing reading in the public school setting, I will take a look at, we will run a process. We will have an IEP, meaning if the student is eligible for special education, we will say, okay, the student is accessing reading. Are there any direct instruction and services needs that exist in order for that student to make appropriate progress in reading when they're here? And I could write sort of a limited IEP for purposes of the needs of the student during that period of time that they are in the public school receiving public education. Anytime a public entity is offering public education, it indicates a right to a free appropriate public education for a child eligible for special education. So I know that's sort of been out there and a question, and there are legal rights related to any time a student is in the public school setting. We're going to talk about possible access to funds for services. I know that there are also a lot of school districts who will engage families in providing access to being part of a small group service during the school day for a child who is in homeschool. And again, we'll talk about that as something that you can ask about through a relationship with a special educator or a building principal or a director of special education. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And there is a formal requirement for consultation for homeschool families in the special education rules. So we'll talk about that as well. Karen, I see another maybe is for a question. Go ahead.
Yes, I think you did answer it, but I will read it. What if the student needs push-in services to be able to access a general education class?
So if there are, when a student is accessing a general education classroom and they have an area of disability that's covered under special education based on the evaluation, then the team needs to come together and decide what services are necessary. And so if there is a need for some services in the classroom for purposes of access, that is something that that team should talk about. There are no specific services that are that you are sort of denied access to or automatically entitled to. It becomes the decision of the IEP team. So that is the approach that I would recommend taking with your school district, is to say, I'd like to meet to talk about my student's disability. It is possible that a student may not need services related to their public school access. As an example, if your child's favorite thing to do in the world is be part of a PE class, and they're really good at it, and it's a space that they engage well with their peers, and they're going to go ahead and homeschool, but they really want to be part of a PE class, you can do that, and the student can come to PE. It may not require, even if the student is eligible for special education, they may not need any services or any supports to participate in PE. So it really does depend on what you're accessing about what your school will do related to what the students' needs are to participate, whether there are accommodation needs, whether there are direct instruction needs in order to participate. But you'll need to go through a process by which you have a conversation with the school district related to accessing the general education component that you are accessing as a homeschool family. Is there another one?
Okay. Yes, there's another one.
Yeah.
So some schools have told parents that their children cannot access academic classes, but only arts or recess, etc. Is this allowable?
My understanding is that it is, you can participate in academics as well as recess and lunch and those kinds of things. I am unaware of any limitation on that. And so I am going to show you a resource where we can go maybe answer that question together and go take a look at it, but I'm not aware that there is a limitation on it at this time. I will say, and probably as a disclaimer, that my area of most expertise is related to special education. There's a whole 200-page document almost, I think, that governs all of the responsibilities of families and the intersection of public school and homeschool for the state of Vermont, not all of which have I memorized, but it is where I go when I have a question. And so let's double check that answer. I do know in our system, we do go ahead and provide opportunity for students to come in and participate who are homeschool families in this design of the 40%. But we'll go look at the 40% rule and make sure there aren't any carve outs specific to core academics per se. I think the rule is that you need to be doing at least 60% of the core academics at home. I think that's the relationship, but let's double check that to make sure that I'm right. I see another maybe question, Karen. Do I? No? Was that it? Okay. All right, great. So let's talk about the evaluation process. I want to make sure that you all know that school districts have a child find obligation that includes finding students in homeschool who need evaluations. So we have a duty to be active in our seeking of children who may have disabilities and be eligible for special education, including homeschool students. We need to consider the need for evaluation for any referrals, and referrals can come from a whole variety of sources: parents, caregivers, past teachers, a homeschool teacher if you're using that model. So referrals can come from lots of places. The place to send a referral is, you can just find the director of special education in the system on the website and send it to that person. You can also reach out to the principal of the school, who would be the school where you would attend if you were a public school family. So there are a couple of different resources that you can reach out to, but there really shouldn't be a wrong door for this in a school district. So, even if you have a relationship with a special educator or a teacher, you could ask them, who do you think would be the right person to talk to? We have an obligation as a school district to recognize referrals in any form in which they come. And so there's no formal requirement for it even to be in writing. That's not a formal requirement. Sometimes we ask for that just to make sure we have documentation that a referral came. But getting to the right person, I think, depends on your school district and also your relationship with the school district. And when in doubt, you're welcome to contact your special ed director listed on the website. They will know just what to do. Karen, do I see a question?
Yep, there is a question. We left at the 3-year point in an IEP. Does that change what we do for a referral, as it is a reevaluation?
Mhm. So the school should reevaluate your child every 3 years if they're eligible for special education. And that I would recommend contacting the last special educator or the principal with whom you are working to ask for the 3-year evaluation. And so that should ensue. Again, any relationships you have, I always recommend connecting with those people because sometimes it's most comfortable for people to talk with someone with whom they already have a relationship. It may be true that the person doesn't know the answer to your question, but what they can do is go ahead and hand off to the director of special education, who will look at your case, understand what's happening for you, and understand what the school district should do next. We do seek our homeschool families out and try to make sure we track when the 3 years are up to reevaluate in order to continue to be responsible to child find. Because if you don't evaluate then every 3 years, then you don't know if a student is or is not eligible. I actually think child find implicates us to go ahead and do those evaluations. There is not a rule about this, though. So I do just want to note that this is an area that the rules seem to be silent. And so making sure that you know that and you can go ahead and ask for that and say, we really, we want to make sure that if they are eligible, because if you go ahead and choose to move back into public school at any time, as long as you have an evaluation that indicates eligibility within the last 3 years, what will happen is that the school district will then write an IEP based on that information. So I'd like to move into the planning conversation because the district uses student data to determine if there is a need to evaluate a student for special education, and if so, in what areas. And there's a really interesting relationship that happens in this process with homeschool families. And I think it's really an amazing opportunity and can sometimes be hard for families, because one of the things as an LEA that I need to ask of people when they say I'd like an evaluation is I need the data from the teacher, and that might be you, to think about the impact or how is the student performing. So when we go through the planning process of an evaluation, one of the things we're doing is figuring out whether there is a concern that there is a disability under IDEA. And so we need evidence of that. And so as a homeschool family, if you're thinking about asking for a referral, going ahead and collecting some of that information of the evidence in learning products or observations that you've done of the child to say, this is why I think we need to complete an evaluation. Here are some work samples that help me know that. Here are some observations that I've done and things that I've seen that help me know that. Because you're really sort of functioning as the teacher. This is what we do in public schools as well. We say, okay, there's a referral. We're going to come together as an evaluation planning team and look at all the evidence in front of us related to how the student is performing and whether or not there are any areas of, it doesn't have to be just academics, but behavior, attention, participation, social engagement, concerns about motor issues, concerns about reading and writing and math. So all of these areas are areas of consideration we do in public school when we think about whether or not a student needs an evaluation. And we need that information from you as we start to think about an evaluation. And so we plan an evaluation based on that information. We decide what assessments are going to be done to make a determination about whether or not a child is or is not in need of special education. And then we convene after the assessments are done, and as a reporting team with the parent at the table with all of the parental rights intact, we make a decision about whether there's eligibility for special education. The evaluation components, there are 3 gates. We look at whether or not there is or is not a disability. There are 14 disability areas in special education under the federal law. We look at whether or not there's an adverse effect on educational performance from the disability and whether or not there's a need for specialized instruction. So those are the 3 gates of the special education process. We could do a whole webinar on that process. We're not going to today because we don't have time. I would recommend you maybe watch some of the evaluation resources from VFN if you're thinking about requesting an evaluation. I know that they have lots of information about the special education evaluation process. That you can read and look at and understand about what you'll go through as part of that process. But I did just want to take a moment to share that for a child who is in homeschool, the process of evaluation looks very similar to if you're in public school. The primary difference is where we're getting some of that data that helps us know how the student is performing. It is possible that a school district might need to do some of their local assessment planning measures. So we assess all kids, right, in public school, and we do that with a bunch of different measures. We may implement a reading assessment or a writing assessment or a math assessment with a homeschool student as part of an evaluation process to determine how they're doing compared to their peers in the school district. But the information you bring forward as their teacher is also really valuable. So thanks for thinking about that as you engage. So we've talked about this. Actually, I've kind of covered this in other parts of the presentation, but as a student becomes eligible for special education in an evaluation process, it implicates the need to write an IEP only if the student is in public school. But if they are in homeschool, they would not be obligated to provide services, but instead would address these set-aside services from federal dollars to serve students in private school and in homeschool. We do that through something called a services plan. And so if you are a family who has a child who's eligible for special education and you're homeschooling, you can ask your school district if they have availability to sit down with you and write a services plan. And that means a statement that describes the special education and related services that would be provided if you're in homeschool, that would be paid for by those funds that I described. And I did want to let you know that there's an entire section of the rules, I think it's on page 156 or 157 of the special education rules in Vermont, that govern how we do this work. And it is Rule 2368. And if you are a family who's going to be going through the process of an evaluation and thinking about accessing services through the public school, you should read that rule. We'll talk a little bit about that rule here today, but I want to make sure that you have that number and that resource. Those rules are linked in my presentation, and we'll get into that. I do want you to know, though, that the services plans in Vermont, the way you write them, they are not anything really like an IEP. They're pretty bare bones. And they just sort of describe the circumstances for the child and what services will be delivered. It doesn't go into lots of information about goals or accommodations and modifications of educational materials or placement, or all of the really important parts of an IEP that some of you may know and understand. It is just sort of a document that describes what services will be delivered. Are there any, I don't know if there are any other questions, Karen, should I keep going? Good.
Nope, I think you're good.
All right, so I am going to take us into Rule 2368. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen briefly so I can get myself to where I need to be. And then I want to kind of just share with you what is here. So just give me one moment. There we go. I'm going to reshare. Okay, here we are. So this is Rule 2368, Children with Disabilities Enrolled in Independent Schools and Home Study. And so it describes for you a little bit about what it means, who the students are that are applicable, this is applicable to. It talks about child find, as I had described in the conversation earlier. I touched on that a little bit. It talks about child count. That's not anything you need to worry about. That's about how the LEA counts children, including children who are in home study. It talks about this proportionate share of the funds. So that conversation I was just having about how those funds are apportioned, there is a formula related to how districts receive those funds, and that's codified here and shared. There is a comment here in the rules about making sure everyone understands that there's no right to FAPE, because legally they need to make that clear. And then there is this whole section under services determined around consultation. We're going to talk about these. Some of them I've already talked about. So this idea of child find we just discussed, the idea of the proportionate share funds, the consultation process, how we provide special education and related services, and if there is a decision to implement services, how, if the LEA disagrees with the view of an independent school or parent, how they'll articulate that. So, and then also there's a section here around written affirmation and compliance. So I just wanted to make sure to share all of that with you so that you know that's there. It goes on to describe the services plan and record keeping. There's a section here about equitable services, which is about the decisions about how we provide services, and that we can you can read that to understand and have a conversation with your school district about how they do provide those services. So I wanted to go ahead and just share that section with you so that you could go read it and review it as you review this presentation. I always think it's helpful to see the actual rule as we have these conversations. And I did just want to share that with you. So I'm going to move back now into my presentation.
So Erin, just a quick time check.
Yes.
42.
Thank you so much. So the next is this concept of consultation that's required of school districts. And actually, this presentation is sort of like the obligation of consultation. So school districts have an obligation to share this information, to make it public, to engage with independent schools and engage with homeschool families, and proactively offer a meeting for people to come and learn. So for example, this year we published a flyer. We said, homeschool families in Essex and Westford, please come learn about services plans and this process by which we can provide you information. And it does include the child find component, the proportionate share component, consultation opportunities, the evaluation services plan, and compliance. And that's all within that set of rules that I just reviewed with you. So that is a requirement for school districts in service to homeschool families. A couple of thoughts about engaging with your district. So, you know, this is a place where I, again, just so value VFN's recommendations and their support, because if you're needing to ask some questions about your rights, but you don't want to ask the district, VFN is a great place to go to get those questions answered before you go. But I just wanted you to remember that whether you have a large school district or a small school district, the relationships are key. And in order to initiate a relationship, one of the things that I think is really helpful is to really know what your needs are. So have a comprehensive understanding of what your needs are, and be able to articulate those so that you can talk with someone at the district about that. I always engage families if they're not even sure what their needs are, and I say, okay, let me ask you some questions, you know, tell me about your circumstances, let's figure that out. But you know, some people don't feel comfortable doing that with the district, and I do recommend trying to kind of get that figured out before you reach out. I would also recommend you find a person in the district who you think is best suited to help you. And again, that might be somebody you already know, and it might just be the special ed director, because principals and special educators, excuse me, let me just take a drink, lots of talking. Principals and special educators don't do a lot of work with homeschool. And so because of that, sometimes it can be helpful to reach out to the director directly, who does most of that work. My co-director and I do most of the engagement with around homeschool, and then we provide directions to our special educators. In Essex Westford, I assign a case manager for children who are in homeschool and eligible for special education to track them, and also to help write services plans. So that is something that we do in Essex Westford. Every district may have a different process. And so if that's the case, the special ed director will know what that is and be able to direct you to the right person. I would recommend doing two things: make a phone call and try to get somebody on the phone to explain what you need, and then also follow up in writing. That's always helpful for me if I miss a phone call and I can't get to that message at that moment in time, but I also have an email that says, hey, just left you a message. This is who I am. I'd like to talk about this. And then I can set a time to engage with that person. So that is sort of what I would recommend in reaching out to districts and trying to engage them in a conversation. If you feel like you need to make a referral, or you have some questions about how this works, or you'd like to know and understand how the district apportions their proportionate share dollars between independent schools and homeschool families. So you can ask all of those questions. I also really recommend knowing and using district resources. I'm going to go ahead and take us to the district website for EWSD, because I think that it's helpful for you to just sort of see a school district website. I'm sure many of you have done this, but they're full of resources that can, I think, be really helpful to homeschool families. So if we look at the website for EWSD, and we go to this section about what we do, all of these links are really full of resources, especially the effective instruction. So as we think about our curriculum site, it has all kinds of information, including the continuous improvement plan, the assessments that we use, programs for EL learners, how we run our Title I programs, that can be really, really helpful to families. You can see a link to the Common Core state standards. And you can also see all of the people who work in our office, in the district office, related to curriculum. And I think that's really important because, you know, as you think about building out your education program for your child, you might want to know what your public school is doing. We can also, you know, as you think about student assessment, for example, you can get to our local comprehensive assessment plan that tells you what we do. Whether or not you use these assessments or not, it at least gives you a framework for, hey, what's the public school assessing? What should I be able to assess when I think about my program? I bring that up because also when we do special education evaluations, these are the kinds of things we look at. You know, these are the data points that we review. And if you have a framework of how you're assessing your homeschool child for progress, and you can kind of tie it into this or understand how this is done in a public school, it allows you to be able to kind of talk across those in a way that potentially could be helpful. Karen, do we have a question? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, we do. We had talked briefly about this, so before the presentation, but there's a family who would like who's issuing a diploma for their child, and they've decided to homeschool. And you know, what does the parent do? Do you know how and if that might impact college applications? Obviously, many homeschool students do successfully apply to college. So, you know, what is the process with that?
So what I would say first is that I would definitely follow whatever process is in that homeschool guidebook related to what's expected of you as a homeschool family in high school related to graduation. And I I do think that a high school diploma that's approved through whatever processes they use for that, I don't really know what the Agency of Education expects related to formal graduation for students through the home study program. Karen was talking with me about this before, and I was like, that's a great question. I wonder if that's in that 200-page document that they have written about how to move through home study. I definitely am not an expert at that, but you all probably have more knowledge than I do about all of the ins and outs of home study and what that looks like. What I would say is that I have seen lots of families who homeschool have students be very successful at college applications. And one of the things that often colleges are looking for is a really robust set of experiences and learning that has happened for a child, a student, a young adult over time, and see that in the application to college. And so I don't have any specific information that there is a limitation on college application for families who are homeschool. And I don't know the percentage, for example, of how that impacts college acceptance or anything like that. I don't have that information. I bet that's out there somewhere in the home study world. I know there are an incredible amount of resources out there for parents who are doing home study. And so maybe we can follow up with that, Karen, and find an answer to that question specifically. I do see another chat. I don't know if there's an answer in there. Was there an additional question? I can only see the number of chats, so it's just flagging me.
I think it's just an acknowledgement that that is that 200-page resource.
Yeah. Yes, it's got to be in there. I didn't have time when Karen asked me that before to run through that, but I definitely would cite you back to the agency, and the agency answers questions for home study parents all the time, I think, right? There are people there who you can call and ask that question to as well to make sure that you have the right answer.
Yes, and I think it's Alicia Hanrahan who is the AOE person for home.
Yes. So I'm going to move back. I know that we only have about 8 minutes left. I'm glad that we've been doing questions along the way because I think that's helpful. And I'm going to move, sorry about the throat. All right, here we go. So that was a little bit about some resources. I have linked that document here for you so you can get right to that document and begin searching through the information that you need for general education. I also found this resource, and I don't know a lot about it, but there were some really cool articles related to homeschool in Vermont from a legal perspective, sort of like, what are my rights and how do I know? And I can't tell you that those are all good resources, but it did show up in my research for this, and I thought it would be valuable to share with you because as you're interested in special education as a home study parent, special education is completely linked to general education. Never should they ever be separate. Special education services are designed to ensure general education is accessible and successful for students with disabilities. And so I wanted to make sure that you had those resources. All right, so I did want to spend just a moment in sharing a couple of websites with you that we often use to think about how to intervene for students with disabilities in public education. As you probably know, IDEA requires that we use research-based approaches to educating students with disabilities. And so sometimes we are in the practice of trying to figure out what are the best programs out there. What does research say about programs that will be best designed to meet the needs of the children who we serve? And there are two places I always recommend people go. The first is the What Works Clearinghouse, and the second is the National Center on Intensive Intervention. Both of these websites will provide you a very long list of programs that can be purchased and used for instruction that have been shown to work well. And I share that with you because there's no requirement to be a public school to purchase or use some of the materials, and many of them are free as well, within the context of instruction. And so if you have an evaluation for your child that indicates some areas of need of intervention, you can use these websites to know and understand what's out there that will work well to intervene in the area that the child is needing intervention. You might even decide to go to a training to help learn about what program you might be interested in implementing if you're homeschooling. I also included understood.org here. Understood.org was developed by the National Center for Learning Disabilities in partnership with, I think, some other entities. And it is an amazing website for families of resources about how to think about different disabilities and what kinds of interventions are necessary, as well as all kinds of information about the special education process. So if I was going to give you, as a homeschool family, 3 places to go to think about the relationship between your child's needs and the program that you're developing, these would be my 3 recommendations. I got it down to 3 so that you had a clear place to go. And I think that it is always good to provide families the resources that we're using too to think about how to intervene for children who need to make some progress in a particular area that they're not there yet, and they need more. So would encourage you to visit those websites to be able to think about what you might do in your home study program. I also included these here thinking maybe I would have time to walk through them with you, but we don't have time because we only have 4 minutes left of the presentation. So I want to make sure if there are any outstanding questions that I get to those, but did want to share these resources with you so that you could go explore them on your own, and maybe get some questions answered for yourself in these spaces that you wouldn't have otherwise known the answer to. So I hope that helps. All right. So you can find me in a couple of places. One is on Twitter at VT Educator. You can also email me at emcguire@ewsd.org. It's been a pleasure to spend some time talking about these topics with you today, and I would be happy to answer a couple of questions. I did want to make sure to leave 3 or 4 minutes in case there are some questions. And even if I'm okay if it's also not about homeschool, if there is something in special education, if there was some burning question that someone had. So Karen, I see a couple of comments. I don't know if those are questions or. I think maybe Karen is muted. Okay, let's see. Thank you so much for covering this. You're welcome. If a child is taking a general ed class and needs services to access. So yeah. Oh, hi, Karen. Are you back? You're muted now. Yeah, something happened. I think you lost connectivity maybe, but now you're muted.
Yes, I had technical issues. So yes, of course, right before. Yes. So I'm sorry that I left. No, basically stopped working.
No problem. I did pull up the chat so I can see it now. And it says, if a child is taking a gen ed class and needs services to access, does this come from the proportionate share? I don't believe so. Although I should probably double check before I answer definitively. I've not done that. I've used because I see any public service that I'm offering, any public school that I'm offering, a responsibility I have under IDEA to make it accessible. And I have not used the proportionate share dollars to do that, but I could also be wrong about that. So let's double check that in the rules to make sure that I'm right. But I would definitely reach out to your special ed director, and maybe we can follow up with you about an answer to that question to make sure that we have the right response.
So are there any other questions? I'm not sure how much I missed for the minute that I was gone.
Nope, that's fine. I just sort of took over and pulled up the chat. So that's fine. I just would like to say again, a big thank you to VFN. Thank you to all the families out there who end up watching this later, and especially to those of you who are here today. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for your great questions. I hope it's helpful, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Karen,
before everyone logs off, Rachel should be putting a link to our evaluation in the chat. And we ask that that people take a few minutes to complete it so we can make improvements and fulfill our grant requirements. We also have more workshops coming up, and you can find details of those on our homepage of our website, vermontfamilynetwork.org, along with the links to previously recorded ones. We have tons of information on our website. You can follow us on Facebook or join our closed Facebook page if you are a parent. You can also sign up for our monthly e-news or check out our YouTube channel. And yes, I think I will wrap it up. I think people are dropping off. So VFN is here to help, and contact us by phone or email. So thank you again, Erin, so much for this very informative webinar. Thanks to everyone for joining us, and have a great day.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, bye, Erin.
Bye-bye.